Hello, everyone. This is Diane Summers from the American Rose Society. Welcome to our webinar today. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and we'll get started in a few minutes. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Diane Summers, president of the American Rose Society, and I'm really glad and happy to be back with Wes Harville from Jackson and Perkins. It's great to be chatting with you about roses again, Wes.
Yes, it's a great time to be thinking about it. I know it's spring in a lot of part of the country, and a lot of people are under snow, but it's coming.
It sure is. I love this time of year. For today's topic, we had discussed doing a roundtable on zone-specific care and specifically talking about Zone 6 and Zone 7. And I thought it'd be great if we could invite some of our consulting Rosarians from the American Rose Society to join us today as we talk about selecting that right rose for your garden. Consulting Rosarians for the American Rose Society, this is a program that the American Rose Society is very focused on. It's an opportunity for us to share our knowledge about roses and to make sure that we have people that grow a lot of roses available to those across the country so that you can get great care information on growing roses in your specific climate. So today, again, focused on 6 and 7, but frankly, a lot of the concepts they're consistent across all different plant zones. And I am sure that we'll all learn a few things from this discussion.
I agree. We've got some real experts here.
So I thought it would be good if we started by looking at the plant hardiness zone map again, just to make sure everyone is familiar with that, with their planting zone. So the zones are established based upon the average minimum temperature, and it's over a period of time. We've all had some kind of crazy weather going on this year, either too warm or too cold, but we do know that that's just 1 year. So this is an average, again, over a period of years. So you want to look at your geographic area, and you can find this map easily on the internet if you're not familiar with what your plant zone might be. And your zone really helps to identify which plants are going to do extremely well in your planting zone. Now, I would say that roses in general, you can grow them anywhere. We have members of the American Rose Society that grow roses in the desert. And we have members that grow roses in Alaska, right? So, but how we grow those roses and perhaps even the type of roses we grow might differ based upon those planting zones. But you can grow roses anywhere. So as we started to plan for this program, we really had a lot of fun talking about why we grow roses. Once you start growing roses, sometimes it's kind of hard to stop, as you see in Ron's rose garden here with 150 rose bushes. So let's just start with Cheryl. Tell us why you grow roses.
I grow roses because of the thrill I receive when I go out to the garden and a bloom is starting to open of the most beautiful flower that God has ever created. I grow roses because no other flower in Northwest Ohio is going to bloom from the last week of May until the first snowfall.
That's right. Roses are growing throughout the season, and you can enjoy your roses every single day, and new blooms are coming. Ron, why do you grow roses?
Well, I have several different reasons, and one of them is the long bloom cycle we have here in Zone 7. You know, I can have roses here from the 10th of May to the 10th of November, and I don't know any flower in my garden out here that lasts that long. But one of the things I like about growing roses because it connects me with people. In other words, people that would normally be around are attracted to the roses, and they come to your open gardens and workshops and stuff like that. So I think I love roses. The varieties that we have, but I also like the way it connects us to people that we normally would not meet.
And Ken,
And
what
then-
might you add?
Well, I come from a long line of farmers and I like to grow things, and I like to grow beautiful things, which lends itself to my other hobby, which is photography. And I like to compete in photography contests, one of which is the ARS photo contest.
I don't know any flower that can give you more in your garden, from fragrance to color selection to pollinator attractors. There's just nothing else like it.
And I think what we've learned over the years, and you started to see this with the breeding programs, that roses often take different forms these days, and hopefully we'll see some of those within the program today. But certainly there's a wide variety. There's small plants, there's climbers, there's shrubs, there's all different types. So really, there's a rose for everybody's garden.
And every landscape use.
As part of our consulting Rosarian program with the American Rose Society, we often are providing advice and guidance to individuals on how to grow their roses. And of course, we've learned that by asking other consulting Rosarians or hearing from other consulting Rosarians. Cheryl, what's the best advice that you have given or received as it relates to growing roses?
When I first started growing roses, I had a mentor in the Toledo Rose Society. So he gave me a lot of advice. I've learned a lot from just being around other Rosarians. But the most important advice I ever got was read the label. So I'm talking about the product, any product that you're going to apply to your rose bush, anything, any insecticide, any fungicide. Before you even begin, read the label.
That's
Great advice. Ron, what might you add?
Well, the man that mentored me 30 years ago used to tell me not to grow more than I can enjoy. And at the time he had 600, so I guess he really enjoyed it. But also, I always tell people to grow the ones that fit their time. That's one of the first things I ask somebody when they want to grow roses. I said, how much time do you have? And you'll get different answers. And we all know it does take time to grow roses. And so I try to fit the roses or recommend roses to them that their time allows, because if they want to grow 100 hybrid teas or 50 hybrid teas, they're going to spend a little bit more maintenance on them they would maybe a shrub or a miniature. So I try to fit the person's schedule, fit the roses to the person's schedule and what time they have to devote to it.
Ken, what are your thoughts?
Greatest pieces of advice I'd ever got was from a well-known Rosarian named Howard Walters. And he had a quote, and he said, the best thing for a rose garden is the gardener's shadow. And what he meant was we need to go through those gardens every day to see what's going on. Because whether it's a rose garden or just a regular flower garden, things happen quickly. And it's a whole lot easier to prevent serious problems than it is to cure them. And always have tried to follow his advice. And I found in a lot of cases, I've saved myself a lot of heartache by being out there every day and see what's going on.
Don't forget to have fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, roses aren't that much work really, because we have fun because we're in our garden. When I was early on in my rose growing career, if you will, I was told to feed your soil and to take care of your soil, and that will take care of your rose. And truly, that's the same advice you would give to, you know, any flower garden, right? Is to make sure you're growing it in good conditions, including, you know, having enough sunlight, at least 6 hours of sunlight a day, having great soil with good drainage. In my early years, I thought I could just add a lot of fertilizer and they weren't growing very well. And I found out that my soil pH was just way too high and those nutrients weren't being absorbed by the plant. So I tried to take care of my soil these days. I had a lot of organic materials and it makes a big difference in my garden.
Great advice.
Here's some examples of different flower forms that you can see with the Dainty Best hybrid tea up in the upper left-hand corner. And again, these are all hybrid teas, so they're more of a single bloom on a longer stem, like you'd consider when you received or gave those dozen rose bushes, or dozen roses, but truly, we have all different types of flower forms. And as you enjoy growing roses, you'll find that you'll start to get very interested in the many different forms that are available. What would be the best advice for selecting new roses that you would give a new rosarian, a new gardener? Cheryl, what do you think?
That is what I was going to address, is the new gardener, maybe a first-time rose bush grower. So I would suggest that they purchase the rose bush that's going to meet their expectations. I would suggest for a beginner, and there's others that I would suggest down the road. But if you're a beginner, I would suggest that you buy a knockout or a double knockout. And to add beauty to your garden in your first year, get a floribunda. One that I would suggest is Burst of Joy. It adds just a tremendous amount of color all summer long. A beginner gardener will be successful with double knockout, or Burst of Joy. In your second year, then I would start looking for something, maybe you're interested in fragrance, or maybe you're interested in form. I would say in your second year, then venture out a little bit.
And Ron, what advice would you give?
Well, one thing about a beginner in selecting roses, if they don't have any success, right in the beginning, they won't continue the hobby. I found that out just from talking to new members and stuff. So I always like to recommend shrub roses and miniatures, which can be grown in containers or in the ground. They usually have good success with them, and then go to maybe the grandifloras or the floribundas or the hybrid teas, but they've got to have success. And one of the ways that I advise new members is come to open gardens and see the flowers actually growing in the garden in our zone. So they'll look at that and say, I can be successful with this because it's growing right here. So I always, like I said, you've got to get the new person trying to grow a rose, especially people that join the rose societies. They need success right in the very beginning. And there's a lot of good roses out there in the shrub and miniature category that will give them that.
Ken, your thoughts?
Well, I kind of think along some of the same lines as they do. I would say, first off, know your zone so you'll know the roses that are going to grow well. And then pick a reputable nursery to get your rose from so that you get a good start. And then lastly, know your yard, know where it drains well, know where you get at least 6 hours of sunlight, and know what type of soil you have. Here in East Carolina, we know that for millennia, this was a seabed. And after that, only two things were really grown here. One of them was a pine forest and the other one was a tobacco field. And knowing what the history of the ground that you're going to plant your roses on is extremely important as to how you're going to prepare the beds and so on. The other thing I would say, plant those easy cared growers roses, as Cheryl said. And here in the Carolina district, we have a list of roses that grow well in our district. So if you get in touch with somebody in our district, they can give you advice that's what's really going to grow well in this zone, in this area for you. And you start off with a success, which is good for everyone.
So I noticed that several of you have mentioned districts or rose societies. For our participants that are attending today, The American Rose Society has over 200 local rose societies around the country. And those are opportunities for you to learn as well. Many of them have meetings, they have flower shows where you can go to and see the roses that people are growing in your local area. And certainly they can help with advice. Ken, if somebody wanted to get a hold of somebody in the Carolina district, if you live in that part of the country and you have a question on roses, how would they do that?
Well, I could either contact the American Rose Society there in Shreveport, or we have a website in the Carolina district. And we have a website, and it has all the pertinent information you would need to know to get in touch with a CR in your area where you live, and they can fill you in on all these sustainable roses or that grow well in your area.
That's great. And I think you'd find the same at in other areas of the country. So there's plenty of information that's out there. And of course, you can always go to rose.org. You know, one of the things I like to do when I am helping someone with new roses is to really understand what they're looking for, where they're planting the rose, how much space they have, maybe even what kind of colors they like. Do they want fragrance? And of course, as I think everyone's mentioned, those roses that grow well in that area. We really have a great opportunity these days because the breeders have really stepped up the quality of roses from 40, 50 years ago. Most roses that are coming on the market today are fairly hardy and they're disease resistant. So growing roses is really not difficult anymore. And you really have much more time to enjoy that rose.
It's really the golden age of roses, as far as I'm concerned. The market is awash with great varieties. And one of the difficult things is growing every one that you want to grow. A good place to start is at Jackson & Perkins at jacksonperkins.com. We have all the roses pictured and described. We have learning videos and blogs to help with current topics. And of course, we have our horticulturists available at the call center if you have any questions.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Wes, because one thing that you really should do is make sure you start with good quality plants. So I stay away from the $2.99 version at the local hardware store. If you purchase a rose from Jackson & Perkins, or you purchase it from a nursery in your area where you have a big growing plant with buds on it, you've got a healthy plant to start with. And that's really important to get off on the right foot. So of course, what's my first step to start growing roses is the question that we at the American Rose Society get all the time. We like to work in garden centers and help people choose those roses. New members come into our meetings with this kind of question. Cheryl, how do you respond to this?
A lot of what I would be saying now, we've already talked about. Going to the American Rose Society for advice, finding a consulting Rosarian in your area. Those are important things. Getting a soil test in the early spring. So, maybe you need more nitrogen than just an average fertilizer. And I am going to say the slide that's up right now, is that not gorgeous? I really encourage our listeners to join a Rose Society. And if you go to rose.org, they're very helpful. That's the American Rose Society. They are very, very helpful. They will connect you with consulting Rosarians in your area. Rose societies, attend meetings. Yeah, I have never been to a Rose Society meeting where there were not people that immediately came up and talked to you and just were very, very helpful in all kinds of ways.
And I know you love that crescendo rose.
I do love that crescendo rose, the one there at the top left.
Yes. Yeah, it is a beautiful rose, and I love it too. So I know it's very popular and it does very well in your area of the country.
It does.
Ron, what would you tell somebody if they're just getting started with roses?
Well, one of the questions I get when somebody first starts, of course, pick the right rose and for that person. But I tend to lean more toward telling them how to prepare their soil. You talked about it earlier. It's very, very important. If that soil's not right, you don't have a good sandy loam and good drainage, they're not going to be successful here in Tennessee because we have a lot of clay. So to get them off to a good start, I'll talk more about location and their soil, and then make sure they get a #1 grade rose and plant it. And like you said earlier, don't go to the discount stores. I've actually seen roses for sale in the grocery store in the little bags. And my mentor used to say that was them roses are in body bags. And kind of funny, but they're not #1 grade, and they might work and they may not. So if you're going to get started, I always tell them get a #1 grade rose and spend a lot of time and energy on their soil and getting it where it needs to be.
Ken, your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to piggyback on them a little bit, both Ron and Cheryl. First off, on the CR thing, part of our charter is to help people with their own gardens, and we have the ability to go out there and go right to their house and point out things for them and help them with the things that normally come up as an early or a novice rose grower. The other thing is, as one Ron says about prepping your beds, I like to see people start their beds way before they get their roses. If they can do it a year before they plant their roses, they're better off because they get rid of all the pests and problems they're going to have before they put their roses in it. Additionally, besides doing your soil test, I like to add things like there's several products on the market that give you microbes, friendly microbes to get introduced in your garden, which will enrich in your soil for the roses. And I like to prepare their home before they get there.
It's springtime. It's springtime more for you than me. I'm in a zone 5. I don't think I've mentioned that, but so I'm getting ready for a snowstorm tonight. My roses aren't growing yet, but I know in zone 6, 7, 8, those roses are starting to leaf out and bud out, and I can't wait till mine are there. But what's the one thing you always do in your garden in springtime? Cheryl?
I'm in zone 6A and we're expecting 6 inches of snow tonight. So I am not doing my spring work yet, but the one thing I'm going to do very shortly, I fertilize every single bush in my garden, and I use a 5-month fertilizer. This saves me a lot of time during the summer. So it's a one-time fertilizing. I use here locally, it's called Lasco. And so I use that, and I also do organic fertilizing also. So every bush in the entire garden gets fertilized sometime in March, early April.
And we fertilize once the leaves start to come out, right? It's not going to do a lot of good to add fertilizer before then. But as Cheryl's mentioned, you can use a slow release fertilizer. I do that as well. It really helps the plant because it's going to get those nutrients throughout the growing season.
Osmocote is available all across the country, so anybody and everybody could use an Osmocote.
Yep, any of those slow releasing products will really help your roses because they really do like to eat a lot. Ron, what's the one thing you always do in the spring?
Well, the first thing I do, of course, is clean my beds and get them ready, which I've already done. But the first thing I do, and you spoke on it earlier, is first lesson I learned growing roses is check your pH before you even get started. And I normally do that when I prune my roses. I'm right there in that area, and I'll check the pH. And if it's too low, I'll use lime excuse me. If it's too low, I use lime to bring it up. If it's too high, I use sulfur to bring it down. So one of the first mistakes I made growing roses the first year, I remember 30 years ago, is that my pH got off and I wasn't having very many blooms. And luckily I had a man that was mentoring me during that period of time that brought his little pH meter, showed me how to use it. And I think that's very important because I think people that start out growing, they need to learn about pH in their soil because it's very important with roses.
And it's easy to take a soil sample and send it in to your county extension office. I do that every spring in my beds. You know, it's not just for roses, but other plants do better in various pHs. For roses, that's about a 6.5 pH is somewhat ideal. And Ken, what do you always do in your spring rose garden?
Well, I don't mean to rub it in, but my roses are already blooming.
Oh my gosh.
So we're way early this year, but what do I do? Well, as Ron said, I get all the old leaf matter and the old mulch out of the garden so that all the pests that overwintered in there go with it. And typically I like to use a couple like dormant oil or neem oil, which are both organic products, to kind of smother any pests that might be left behind. And then finally, that I get my pruning done. We always prune in the spring to get rid of any diseases or just to get some new growths and some new blooming started, which is how you get your best blooms. And
Right, you want to make sure you clean up that bush and prune away all the dead material that might be on your canes.
yeah, you know, that's one of the most important things is just to try and remove as much potential for disease or problems you're going to have organically.
You know, Cheryl mentioned that we're going to get snow in the next few days. She's getting it in Ohio. I'm getting it in Wisconsin. This time of year is a little bit variable with our spring weather, but a little bit of snow generally is not going to hurt your plants. You know, snow in it by itself is really a great insulator. And typically, even though we're getting 6 inches of snow, it's going to melt right away, right? Temperatures are going to be in the 30s. So, you know, it's okay. I'm not worried about snow at this time, and I don't think Cheryl really is either. But if you start to prune too early in the spring, then you might start to have more difficulties. Your rose is going to take a bit more to get started back up again, because if it has really cold weather, that'll damage the plant. It'll have to start over, if you will. So something to think about. I always tell people you can never start too late, really, but you can start too early in pruning. Now, in zone 6 or 7, that might not be the issue because you're going to have a little bit more mild of a climate. But you still do want to do enough pruning in that springtime to shape your bush and to start to bring that energy up into the plant and formulate new blooms. You're consulting Rosarians here, so I know that you're always asked questions about growing roses, and we've covered a lot of things today, but what other questions might you frequently get about growing roses? Cheryl?
I'm usually asked about what I'm using for fertilizer. And the other question I get most often is how to prune. And I think a lot of people think pruning is difficult, but it does not have to be. Like getting the dead out of there, forming your bush, eliminating some of the unnecessary limbs that are there, and just basically cleaning it up. Then you'll get bigger and better, more beautiful blooms.
That's right. Yep. And Ron, what kind of questions do you frequently get?
Most of the questions that I get has to do a lot of times with identifying insects and diseases during the season. And for a new rose grower, they don't always know, they really don't know how to identify a black spot. Some of them, they see it on the leaf and it is a black spot. So I'm getting more questions from people that want to know, identify a disease. And then in our area, it's a growing area, Middle Tennessee area. We have a lot of people that's moving here, and they want to bring their roses with them to Middle Tennessee from different parts of the country. And I have actually assisted numerous people in transferring several roses, especially some that has some sentimental value to it, to Middle Tennessee, and to transplant them in their new garden. So I didn't used to get a whole lot of that, but here in the last 4 or 5 years, with the growth we have here in Middle Tennessee, people are moving here from all over the United States to live here. So that's kind of interesting. That's an opportunity also to get involved in the ARS and our local National Rose Society. And we have grown by doing that. And we've had people move here from California and the East Coast and everywhere else. So I think disease, identified disease and insects and how to transplant and move a rose bush.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Ken, what questions do you frequently receive?
Well, basically two main questions. The first one, of course, as Ron stated, is black spot. And I discuss what they are or are not willing to do. And primarily, I talk to them about newer roses, new introductions that don't need spraying and are highly disease resistant. If that's the type of rose that they want, and they don't want to spray, then I'm going to head them towards the newer introductions that it's not necessary that they do this often. The other main question I get, and that's because I'm in East Carolina and we have a whole lot of them, is deer. And some people in our society, if they don't take care of the deer, they may not see a rose. So there are some new products out now that will keep them off your property. It's a repellent that does really well, and a lot of them have peppermint oil in them, which doesn't bother people, but there's a whole lot of animals that don't like peppermint oil. Deer is one of them, squirrels is one of them, rabbits is one of them, mice is one of them. So by using this deer out product, you can take care of a whole lot of deer problems.
So I know a few of you have mentioned black spot, and I think a lot of people think about black spot when they think about roses. And as you said, the good news is there's a lot of great roses being brought into the market these days that are very hardy and resistant. And even on this page, that beautiful climber, Florentina, happens to be from my garden. And that rose does not get any black spot, right? It is very disease resistant. And as you can see, it throws a lot of beautiful sprays of red roses.
It blooms like crazy.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today as we start talking about spring and roses and the beautiful gardens that we envision for everyone. I really want to thank Jackson and Perkins for being hosts for this webinar series today. And I truly appreciate Jackson and Perkins as a partner for the American Rose Society. Members of the American Rose Society receive a 20% discount when we buy roses through Jackson and Perkins. And as we've mentioned here today, if you have questions, go out to rose.org. Look on the internet, you'll find our local rose societies. You can get a list of them at rose.org as well. We love to talk about roses.
I want to thank everybody participating on this today. It's kind of a new format for us, and I think it's really working well. And I'd encourage everyone out there to look for more webinars like this. We got a lot of topics to cover.
We sure do, and it's going to be a fun year. Okay, this is Diane again. We have just a few moments for a little bit of a Q&A, and we received a lot of great questions when everyone was registering for this webinar. So we'll go through a couple of those today, and we can follow up more after this program to try to get answers to all of the questions that we did receive. I'll start with Ken. Maybe Ken could help us. There's a lot of questions about fertilizing, and specifically, when do you begin to fertilize and what do you fertilize with? Ken, what are your thoughts?
Well, Diane, here, I typically plan all my pruning and fertilizing around my growing region, which is 7A. Here in 7A, we usually see our last frost around, or we're usually safe by the 15th of April. So I will tend to prune my roses at the end of March. And then about a week later into the 1st of April, I will fertilize my roses. The reason I do it this way is there's less chance that all the new growth that is being stimulated won't be damaged by frost. As far as fertilizers and what I use a commercial fertilizer for sure, because it can get immediate nutrients to the roses. Additionally, I like a delayed fertilizer that will fertilize up to 5 or 6 months. Additionally, I also use organics, and the reason I use organics is so that I can keep my soil healthy. Because if you have healthy soil, you normally will have healthy roses.
Great advice. Thank you. And Cheryl, there were a number of questions around how much sun is actually required to grow roses. Are there roses that are more shade tolerant? What are your thoughts?
It is recommended that you have 6 hours of sunshine a day. There could be some rose bushes that could perform with less sunshine than 6 hours, but it will limit the plant's ability to flourish if you're getting less than 6 hours of sun a day. There is one thing I could recommend. Supposing you live in an area where you have many trees, how about planting in pots, moving your pot into a sunny location during the most sunshine of the day, and then you could move that plant back under the trees in the backyard later on in the day. So growing roses in pots might be one way you could get around having a shady location. But if you can get your plant to have 6 hours of sun a day, that is the best recommendation I can give.
Great, thank you. And Ron, another question on how do we keep roses growing and blooming in the heat of the summer? What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's a good question. I experienced this last summer, and we had no rain in May and June, which is very critical here because that's when our roses are at their peak. So what I like to do, number one, is you're gonna have to water more often when you have no rain. And so I have a drip system here so I can control that. And so that's what I did last year. And one of the things I added to it, and one thing about the heat that does to our roses, our blooms seem to be smaller because they develop quicker and that they don't stay on the bush long enough to grow enough to be a big bloom. But another thing I like to do in that period of time, and I've kind of tested this through time, I like to use once a week during that period of time last year, I used liquid fertilizer, either organic or inorganic. Now this is on top of what I've already put there, and it seems to get into the plant, gives you a little extra energy, and maintain a good bloom and repeat bloom on the bush. So water more often and more than you think. Especially when you get up into the 90s. In May last year we were 93, 94, which is kind of unusual for May. So I would say water and add a little liquid, either organic or inorganic fertilizer, something like Real Balance, like Miracle Grow, or I like Easy Feed from Baby Fertilizer, which is an organic fertilizer.
Okay, thank you. I think that's going to be a wrap up for today. We're running out of time here. I do want to thank Jackson and Perkins and Wes again for this wonderful opportunity to share how to select the right rose for your garden. I know that we'll be following up. Jackson and Perkins will be following up with you after this call, so you'll receive some additional information. And this video will be available on the Jackson and Perkins YouTube site. And if you have any other questions moving forward, contact Jackson and Perkins and reach out to the American Rose Society. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.